Today we're going to focus on one of my favorite creators, Dark Side of Jim Henson. Welcome to the HolmFront. Good evening.
Good evening.
Hello, welcome to the weekend. This is our third installment for the month of October, which we decided to try and focus on some more spooky films. We'll just go with films because we haven't done anything else lately. And you and I were just watching some snippets of a previous episode just to kind of see how we were jiving.
It's terrible. It's a really bad show.
I have to apologize. I will say that one of us, I won't mention names, tends to harp far too much on Star Wars. So I'm going to try and avoid a lot of that, or I'm going to try and make that person avoid that for the most part.
The other person, I think, was doing really well, though. I was watching their work, and I thought they had some really, really good takes.
Oh, good, yeah.
So it's just the one that you need to worry about.
You'll have to tell me which one, because there's one that I've been thinking about firing, and
were you?
I'm gonna take him off salary at least. So today we are going over someone that I've loved for quite a while, and who I'm trying to get you to appreciate the same way I do, which I don't think is gonna work, but I'll try anyway. Jim Henson. Jim Henson.
For the record, I think it's working better than you think it is.
Oh, good.
I just don't like Labyrinth all that much. That's all.
It's that one.
But I do like Dark Crystal, and I do like the Muppets. Even though, because there's a real charm to Jim Henson's work.
Yeah.
Even though, like the Muppet movies, a lot of them I think are very hit and miss, like as movies. But there's nothing like the appeal because there's just such a rare feat. And I remember seeing the Muppet Treasure Island one in the theater as a kid and being like, this is so cool. Like, it's so cool that it's a movie where you have these Muppet characters. No other movies like this. And that being like this revelatory experience for me is like, what a new, different idea. And that just like sticking with me for so long. Because I don't know, I do like, you don't really, this is like puppeteering, right? And you don't really see that very often. It's a very underrated and underappreciated art form, honestly.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, which is Jim Henson's background. He got into, I think he went to school for it, and then I'm a little rusty on his background, so I might be wrong on some of this.
Where would you go to school to learn puppeteering?
He was born in the 30s, so there's a lot more opportunity for stuff like that back then.
I suppose so. I'm just thinking, like, nowadays, you can't even find a school that teaches video game design. You can now, but they're still really rare.
That's fair.
It's just interesting to like I don't know where. I feel like you would have to go to a school dedicated, like it's just like a puppeteering school. It wouldn't be like at a college. I've never seen that in the arts program.
Yeah, I haven't looked into that for what it would look like today. But I think he got a lot of inspiration from overseas. A lot of European artistry or storytelling was through that.
Okay.
And so that's where he developed a lot of that. I think initially he was just extremely handy. He knew how to put things together, and so he started building his own puppets, and then just started making an art form out of it, which is interesting because he made it really mainstream.
He did. Yeah.
Everybody knows the Muppets because of Jim Henson.
Right.
And so, but I don't think that was what he wanted to be known for. Was the other interesting thing is, he's got the Muppets, he's got Fraggle Rock, he's got Sesame Street. He's got that's him. That's yep. He's very specific in his
Fraggle Rock
style.
is terrifying. It's great.
As is most of his stuff.
The underlying horror is there, which is what qualifies him to be discussed in October.
That's true. Yeah, because these two, the ones that we're going to talk about today, are Dark Crystal and Labyrinth, which are specifically terrifying in a lot of ways.
And they are different than Muppets and Fraggle Rock and all that other stuff. And that
it's almost polar opposites. They're like, you would not expect it to be the same person that's doing this stuff, but
yeah, because because it's such a darker turn than what you see with like Muppets or whatever. But it's less about like a mass appeal. Like the Muppets have like the treasure one, and then the Christmas Carol one, which is my
Right.
favorite. But those are like, well, let's just do an adaptation of the Christmas Carol. It's sort of like Muppet variation of this, Muppet that. But then you go to Dark Crystal and Labyrinth, and these are just his ideas. He's
Yep.
going off rails, and he's like, no, this is my vision that I want to create. And it's not like for a brand, it's not for franchising, it's not for any of that. It's just, as an artist, I want to make this movie. And so I think that's where our interest comes in, or at least it becomes more interesting to talk about these particular pieces, because the amount of oversight that he gets and the amount of creative control is much greater, I think.
Yeah, that's fair. And obviously that bleeds through. That was something that stood out to you, I think, especially with Dark Crystal.
Especially with Dark Crystal,
Yeah,
yeah.
it just comes through as such a, uninhibited, unfiltered piece.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, he got his start doing. What did he do? He did a couple like smaller shows, and then he got hired on to do a lot of ads, and that's where he started making a lot of money.
Okay.
So he'd do ads with these puppets, and they were always very bombastic and kind of just odd, wacky,
Okay.
which is
Did,
kind of
did
his
he do
through
the
line.
McDonald's characters like Grimace and stuff?
I don't think so, but I mean,
Because Grimace is so generic, I don't really see him doing that. But they have like puppets for
Right.
McDonald's, back in the day.
I don't think so. They may have been inspired by his
Actually,
ideas.
he's not a puppet. He's like a
He's a mascot.
yeah. He's like a
The blob.
suit that somebody wears.
Exactly.
I
Yeah, just
think
a
a very
formless-
disturbing giant purple suit. I don't know why I'm
All
gonna
of
stop talking
those-
about this.
All of those are disturbing. Just McDonald's in general. Just they had some problems back then. If you've ever looked at some of the like real old McDonald's,
Oh, I have. Yeah, there's
it
like a
is-
compilation where it's like McDonald's commercials, except they feel like horror movies now.
That's because
And then
they look like horror
That's
movies.
what they look like.
It's
nowadays.
awful. It's like original It.
You want a hamburger?
Not anymore. No, run. They're in the back of my van. So Jim Henson, he did. This is a long time ago, like 50s.
Okay.
It was there were a bunch of different products that he did, but he'd sign a bunch of contracts where he would essentially just make them an ad, and he would build these puppets in order to do these things, and some of them really caught on. They were really popular, and so eventually he just built his fame into creating these things. And so obviously a couple of like really stuck in, like Sesame Street Will Never Die, probably.
That was him.
What's that?
That was him too.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yep, that's him. Fraggle Rock.
Enormous influence.
What's that?
Enormous influence.
Enormous. Yeah,
Yeah.
incredibly enormous. And then, he was one of the ones, him and Frank Oz. And Frank Oz is the voice of Yoda.
Yeah.
Also the voice of Piggy, Miss Piggy. But they're the ones that helped with Yoda in Star Wars.
Mhm.
I don't think they built him, and that was in someone else within the Lucasfilm crowd.
Okay.
And he was a little bit more complex. He had like some motors and stuff. But there was another one in Labyrinth that was very complex as well, and it kind of dealt with puppetry without being quite puppetry. That's the
Yeah.
character of Hoggle. It's a giant head that they put on somebody,
Yeah.
and that thing it was incredibly complex. Like it moved its eyes and its ears and its eyebrows, and there was a bunch of people like controlling different mechanisms on this face in order to do all these expressions. So they had to understand how the scene was going to go in order to properly emote, which is ridiculous. And there was actually,
Yeah.
this as a complete aside, there was this fun story. I think it's Yesterworld is this YouTube channel. He goes into a lot of these old props and what happens to them. And they found the head of Hoggle, and it got stuck in a suitcase, and it just like got lost to time essentially.
Huh.
Someone finally opened it up, and it was like this decayed, rotted. It was real creepy looking. And they're like, but they found out what it was, and they tried to restore it, and it still looks like a horror
This
movie
face.
prop. Yeah, it was. I'll have to show you the picture of it later. It was rough.
Okay. Yeah,
But,
that's good.
Anyway, real interesting, just random tidbit. Anyway, so today we're talking about the Labyrinth and Dark Crystal.
Yeah.
Two fantasy pieces that Jim Henson took on, just as kind of passion projects outside of his like traditional money making portfolio. Like, because I mean,
Yeah.
Sesame Street and Fraggle Rock and all these other things that he's involved with are very profitable. They're very mainstream. Everybody loved him. And then he was like, well, I've got all this fame. I can finally do something that I want to do.
Yeah.
And so I'll do these things. And so Dark Crystal was the one he did first. And that's
Well,
something that I mean, I love this movie, but go ahead.
well, I was gonna ask. So like, what's before we get into the films? Maybe like, what's the appeal of Jim Henson's work to you? And like, is Labyrinth and Dark Crystal like? How would you compare them with like his other stuff? Like, is it like leaps and bounds more interesting and compelling to you, or is it just kind of like, oh, what a novel like side bit in addition to the Muppets and the Sesame Streets?
Well, um, I'm just gonna have more of a interest in fantasy in general, and so these ones specifically had that
Okay.
appeal because of that. Um, Jim Henson. I read his biography, and I'm a
Yeah.
little bit rusty on it, but he was very much a family man, or very much a father. I'll say that
Hmm.
because I think he and his wife had a lot of trouble, but he loved his kids, and he loved um, making things for kids, which is obviously why you have all the things as they exist.
Yeah.
Uh, so they appealed to me on some level, but not as much. Like Sesame Street's just kind of like, all right, it's fun for what it is, and then I'm just kind of like, I'm moving on. I never got into Fraggle Rock. I don't think. Oh, he also did the dinosaurs one.
Oh, is it Land Before Time? No, it's
No, the other one, the actual like
it,
puppet one with the
yeah, it's
yeah.
like a dinosaur TV show.
It's
It's
real terrifying
it's
looking.
like
Yeah.
uh what's the one with the cartoon with the Stone Age people? Flintstones, the Flintstones. It's like the Flintstones, but it's with
Oh,
dinosaur
right, and
puppet people.
practical, and
Yeah,
it's not cartoon.
it's really creepy and weird.
He has a lot of influence there. Yeah, so these two, because of their fantasy influence,
Okay.
obviously drew me in. He has a very specific style, which is informed by an artist named Brian Froud, who has a lot of really great artwork, and most artists worth their salt will know who that is.
Hmm.
But all of his style is very based on on Brian Froud, which appealed to me quite a bit as well. But he's kind of his through line is like weird and wacky, and most of the Muppet material is going to be like that.
Okay.
These two use that in a fantasy setting, so he's almost like a Tim Burton if Tim Burton made stuff that I enjoyed, right? Rather than just being like dark and morbid and grotesque.
For the heck of it.
Yeah, this is more weird and wacky, but also kind of has an elegance to it.
Yeah.
And so Dark Crystal appealed to me first, just because
You grew up with both of these movies, though, right?
No,
No.
No.
Really, neither. Okay.
Dark Crystal I saw fairly young, but I did not grow up with it. I don't think my parents appreciated it much.
Okay.
Labyrinth I don't think I saw until way later, but I had an appreciation for it because of what it was trying to do. It was like this modern day fairy tale thing that I liked, and I liked a lot of the themes that were in it, and I was like, oh, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
But yeah, Dark Crystal had, because I think I saw this in my late teens. I think it was like 17, 18, 19, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That one had a lot of elements that I love in movies from this era. A lot of practical effects, a lot of real corny like voiceovers.
Yeah.
The music is phenomenal. I love the music for the original Dark Crystal film. And then it's very world building focused, and the world I think is really rich. So I liked that too. But I recently introduced you to this movie. What did you think about it? Now that I've rambled on forever.
You haven't gone on forever. It's I'm enjoying listening to the kind of broader context as we kind of slowly chip away at the core. I liked Dark Crystal. I mean, so I like dark fantasy.
Yeah.
So you like fantasy. I like it dark. And this is a dark fantasy.
It
for
definitely
sure.
is.
We'll have to get into it at some point, but there are some unbelievably dark moments in this film, which when they came up, I was like, how far are we going to take this? And my mind just kept going, repeating that. Like, so it's still going. It feels like they're going to commit to this entire sequence. I don't think we need this, but I guess we're doing it. And it just goes all the way and then some. And you're like, okay, I see why some parents would have been upset. But, in hindsight, I love that kind of stuff. I mean, we're working with puppets here.
Right.
How seriously am I going to take this? So the fact that the film it feels the need to express like this is how evil these evil characters are. Um, I appreciate that because it has to be the substance of their content. It cannot be something that is well, we'll just cut away because it's like, dude, like you're working with material that in and of itself is not going to leave to imagination. The whole point of this is to see the imagination come to life.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that they committed to it and they stuck with it.
I think
And
that's something that bleeds through with Dark Crystal too, is that it really feels like what he imagined
is what you
is
see.
what you
Yes.
see.
Yeah.
And it's extremely detailed and very elegant. And he puts
the
a lot
sets
of
are crazy
Yeah.
in Dark Crystal.
and
They're-
Labyrinth, yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, they're just so intricate, so elaborate. There's just so much lush detail. Probably my favorite scene in this movie is when, Jen. It's Jen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so Jen is
Jin
the
or
main.
Jen, yeah, one or two, yeah.
Yeah, Jen, whatever. Jen, I think it's Jen. Jen and Kira. So Jen's the main character. He's going on a hero's journey, and then Kira shows up and basically is a better hero than he was ever going to be.
Right.
And
At least on a meta, like that's how we were interpreting it. I don't know if the film was trying to convey that, but
I mean, he's a total failure the
He
whole
is,
movie.
yeah.
He doesn't accomplish anything. Even in the one moment in which it's his sole thing that he has to do, right?
Still
He
mess
screws
up.
that up and
Yep.
gets her killed. Spoilers for Dark Crystal. But I was just like, dude, Kira's doing everything. You're just such a loser. Anyway.
Yeah, she's way more competent. She knows the world. She can
Yeah.
fly. Like,
yeah, because she's a female, so she has wings. They're like some
world building
elf,
pieces, yeah.
like species or whatever.
Right.
But
They're called gelflings in the film, but yeah.
Yeah. But there's this beautiful sequence where they're on this little boat and she's like kind of rowing them out.
Yeah.
And just the scenery is immaculate and like the lighting is beautiful. And then like they get like this creature that's flying in the air to like spy on them, and then she like takes it out. And it was like, this is cool. Like this is so ambient. That's the part the movie won me over, where I was like, wow, like this just feels like so much commitment to something. It's like it's all just lovingly crafted and it's beautiful to see.
Right.
So yeah, I really appreciate just the whole style of the film is great.
Yeah. Yeah, because it is beautifully crafted, and that's a testament to Jim Henson. Because I don't know how much he does, but obviously it's a large amount because he creates all of his own puppets, or at least a lot of them. And he had I think he called it a creature's workshop. So he had an entire like warehouse with people dedicated to building these things, and so he would like draw it out or whatever, or he'd have Brian Froud draw it out,
Yeah.
and then lay it down and be like, "Here you guys go, make me a bunch of this."
Mm-hmm.
And then even for the other things like the mystics, the big creatures in the beginning. So there's two types: there's the Skeksis and then the mystics. The mystics are like the gentle ones, the like wizard types or whatever, and then the Skeksis are like this corrupt lizard bird-like type thing. And the mystics are a lot more straightforward. Or I'm sorry, the Skeksis are a lot more straightforward. But the mystics, they created to where they have like 3 arms and they're kind of longer. Like they kind of have a slug-like look to them. I guess there's 2 people in those costumes. One of which is like in the back and kind of holding it all together, and then he's providing the 3rd arm, and then the guy up front is providing the other 2 arms. And so the amount of like dedication that it takes to go through all this stuff. And then there's the land striders, is what they're called. The big tall beasts that they ride in the end.
Yeah.
Those are people in suits as well with these like I don't even know how to describe it. It's like when the clowns walk on the leg extenders, you know? I forgot
stilts.
Stilts. But they have 4 stilts for all 4 limbs.
Yeah.
And that's how they like run around, and it gives them this look. And it's just really cool because you can tell it's a lot of ingenuity that's going into these, and people are kind of thinking of creative ways to create these scenarios and creatures and environments to make it more appealing. And it bleeds through. Like the story, think what you will, but the film itself is just really fun to look at, to watch and experience. And then the story itself is just very, very strange and wacky. And apparently there was a version that he screened that didn't do as well, where the entire race, the Skeksis, the like corrupted ones, they speak an entire language that they just spoke through the
Yeah.
whole bit of the film that they're in, and so no one can understand them. I think they had subtitles up there or something, but it's very, they have a lot of screen time. Like, it's a lot.
Yeah.
And so if they had that in that language, it was turning a lot of people off because they're like, I don't want to sit here and read subtitles for half the movie.
Yeah, there's more of that than there is the English language,
Right.
like just to put it into context.
Or there would have been, if
Or
that
there
was
would
the
have
case,
been
yes.
because the main characters don't actually have that much dialogue with each
Right.
other. They have it's very sparse. But when you get over to the, elite evil rulers, it's these long conversations, and they're all just like, I'll be emperor now. I mean, there's this
Exactly.
great moment when it first starts because the emperor's dying, and then they all kind of crowd around in his bedchamber, and he's like dying, and they're looking at him going, well, I guess he's dead. And then he just, ah! And he goes, I'm emperor.
Well, someone goes into. They think he's dead, and they go in to take his scepter or whatever.
Yeah.
And he grabs onto it. He's like, I'm still emperor. And then he dies, and he just crumples in, and
It's
just
these weird
fades into
moments
dust.
of humor that just slip through. Clearly this is meant to be funny, but he
Right.
doesn't play up into it. It's not like, well, let me pause now so you can laugh. He's just kind of like, it's a serious scene. There's a funny thing in it, but it is part of the serious part of the story.
Right.
And so it's interesting how he layers the two of them together. I guess there's a degree of not taking his own story too seriously, given the fact that it's puppets, because I think there's some degree of challenge to overcome.
Right.
As you were saying, with people they're like, oh, I can't get it because the language. It's like, what is this? I wish they would have kept a version of that film. Maybe there is one out there, because I would prefer to watch that version, because this is partly why I like Dark Crystal more than Labyrinth, is it just feels like a pure vision. It's just like you're in someone's imagination.
Right.
Because
that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good way to
there's
put
no live actors at any point. Everybody is a puppet. And sure, that's a tough sell, but what a inspiring way to showcase this whole other form of art. And going back to what you were saying earlier about the ingenuity, I think this plays a part in that too.
Right.
Sometimes when we're talking about the Oscarina channel, the award show I run for video games, sometimes we have conversations about the programming or the technology that they used in order to create certain things, and how much that factors in, even though a lot of us are not computer nerds in that group, and we're not tremendously interested in the programming technical side. We're mostly looking at the artistic side. It's important, I think, to recognize that with certain mediums, there is going to be a level of ingenuity or craftsmanship on other elements that does matter. If you're looking at a painting, sure, basically this is just about the expression. And there's form and structure, but there's less of technology, or the kind of innovation that the innovation is just with your own imagination, less so with what you can make tangibly in reality. I guess I don't know if I'm explaining it very well, but I just think that a movie like Dark Crystal, in my view, should be revered, because you look at something like that, and it's who else put that much thought and effort to build a world and then shoot the movie within that world, out of all these these materials. This is such a unique film, and for that reason alone, it makes it something special.
I see. So
Yeah.
you like the fact that it's a pure, unfiltered look inside the head of Jim Henson.
Basically,
And for no other reason, even if you don't like the movie necessarily, you can appreciate the fact that it exists as it does.
Yeah.
Just because it's pure Jim Henson art,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, well, and I think it paves the groundwork for other artists to do similarly. And I think it's kind of a shame that we don't see movies like this come up very often. A similar argument I would make for claymation, because claymation is very rare. We don't get it very often. It's tremendously expensive and enormously laborious.
Yeah.
It is so much work to do claymation, as opposed to the computer generated stuff that we typically see. And it's kind of sad that it has to be that way. And there was there's some examples of films that kind of teetered the line. I liked like Flushed Away was an interesting film because
yeah.
it was made to look like claymation and it had claymation elements, but then they had CGI to do a lot of the groundwork in between that to kind of push it over the edge. It was a good experiment at the very least, and I kind of feel like it'd be cool to see more of that. Certain like subsets of the art form can just be so fascinating to see, and I just it breaks my heart a little bit to think about how rare they are, because then it's just like like
Yeah, that is
so cool.
interesting as a point because it's like the amount of sacrifice that he's going to have to make in order to create this thing.
Yeah,
The dedication that it takes in order to create what you eventually see
yeah,
in itself almost inspires appreciation. Just
yeah.
because of what he had to do in order to put it there for you to
Because it's
experience.
plain to see
Right? Yeah,
immediately when
yeah,
you're looking at the film. At no point can you ignore it. You're just stuck going, "Wow," the whole
yeah,
time.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Hmm.
Which, yeah, is what you appreciated. So, what else did you appreciate? Like outside of that portion of it, was there other things that stood out to you from Dark Crystal, or was that like it? And you were just kind of like, well, Jim Henson has a style. I appreciate that he has a style and how artistic it is, but that's kind of where I'd end.
Well, I love the part where the pod person gets his soul sucked out of him.
Yeah,
That
so
was
I'm
pretty rad.
I'm gonna try. We haven't done this on the show before, but I'm gonna try to show
Okay.
this. Let's see if I can do this.
Okay.
I'm gonna just keep the sound off, but I'm
Okay.
gonna play it. So this is the
Keep in
scene.
mind, this is not for the faint of heart.
It's not. It's just one of the best scenes of the movie. And so this podling.
So they basically use.
Well, hold on.
Okay.
Let's just let it finish and
Okay.
just enjoy it in its beauty and detail.
So
And then
probably some super callous.
look how great that is.
His face just like crushes, and then his eyes like.
My favorite part though is this one coming up. So like after it's fun, look at him.
His life essence gets turned into
Decrepit
juice.
So when the light cranks off or
They
whatever,
suck his soul out,
they're just all right.
and then when they're done,
And then he's just like So this is what we're talking about when we're saying that this film is just horrifying in these levels.
right?
So
So they take these podling people, they suck their souls out, they turn them into their zombie slaves, and the reason why
because he doesn't die.
right? No, he's not dead
because-
after this. He's just so traumatized, and after because you've seen other ones move around, you don't know what's happened to them
Yeah.
really, and they're just like,
They're like, we'll show you.
and
Don't
then
worry.
you see this happen to this one, and you're like, what?
So here's the thing: the Skeksis, the monsters, the like antagonists of the film, they believe that there's some prophecy out there that the Gelflings will end their reign in
Yeah.
this, and they have this dark crystal that apparently has like the life force of the land that they live in, but it has this ability, when channeled properly, to sap the life force into
Right.
this vial that they can drink, and it makes them younger and more vitalized or whatever.
Yeah.
So these podlings, which aren't much to begin with, they're just these little, I don't know, they have a culture, I guess.
Like semi-tribalistic
Exactly, but
community.
not a whole lot of life essence, I suppose, so they can only
Yeah.
sap so much out of them. But the fact, because you see them in the beginning, they're like serving the meals or whatever, and they just kind of like shuffle in these chains, and they're like dead in the eyes, and they have this like white hair,
Yeah.
and it's kind of like, and it's like, what is that?
Yeah.
And then you see the like the lively ones,
Uh-huh.
because Jin and Akira go to this village, and then it's taken
Yeah,
over,
and they're like partying.
and they like take
having a
them
great time.
exactly. Yeah, they're all having fun, and they're accepting them in and feeding them
Uh-huh.
and stuff. And then these like agents of the dark creatures or whatever come in, and they
These
start
giant
piling
bugs.
them in into
Yeah.
their packs and stuff, and they bring them back, and then you see this scene, and they're like, we're gonna show you what they've done to these people, or
Right.
these creatures, and you just like you were saying earlier, you're not gonna You're gonna go the whole way, are you? And then it's just like, no, you're gonna go the whole way.
You're so disarmed because you're like, well, this is the guy who does like the Muppet stuff, so it's like a Muppet movie. I mean, it's a little dark, but whatever. Like, it's fine. And then this happens, and you're like, and like everything leading up to it too. Like they strap him in, and he's like,
I know,
like, trying to
he's like, no,
break out of his
please.
chains. No, and it's.
Oh, it's so good. Because most of the time when you show this, or when I show this to people, they're not seeing this coming at all. Like no one does. No one. And it was especially
you're so
funny.
Disarmed.
It's especially funny to watch because you're just dying. Like partly it's shock and horror, but also it's hilarious that you've gotten to see the whole thing. Because you like expect it when you look at someone like, Lucas with Indiana Jones or something.
Yeah, or like Tim Burton, you were saying.
Or Tim Burton.
Like, okay, come on.
Yeah, you know it's coming.
Yeah.
But when the like arc breaks open and people get their souls sucked out and these things are flying around and stuff, it's like, all right, I kind of figured that was within his wheelhouse.
Yeah.
But then you look at Sesame Street and you're like, okay, this is the same guy, and then you see that, you're like,
count to 3, and now
and that. So beware when you see the Dark Crystal. I hope this isn't spoiled too much.
Yeah, viewer discretion advised,
you.
Apparently.
Careful with your children in this room.
It is a very purposeful scene because later on they capture Kira and they're going to suck her life essence out.
Right, so
and her life essence is very important to them because it's like, oh, we'll gain our youth back, like for real, like, and we get the last of the Gelflings.
Yeah.
And so that's a really tense scene. Because, again, they don't hold back. It's like, I'm not going to say what happens, but it definitely starts to happen, and they crank it on, and they're blasting her with this thing, and you're like, am I going to have to watch this character I've been following? Because that was a random podling, and I was traumatized from that. Now I have to watch a character.
Yeah, one that you actually like. You're rooting for her because she's the actual
Yeah, I mean, because she's the one who does everything. She's like, Jin, this way.
Yeah.
And then like, oh no, look, don't trust him. He's a bad guy. Well, I'm not sure. It's like, yeah, he's a bad guy. We can all see it except for you.
We're a fan of Jin. He's definitely inept, unfortunately.
It's fine because it is part of that like fable storytelling where like the hero is just this like, it's kind of like a Frodo Baggins sort of thing.
Sure.
Like Frodo's kind of a failure. But he's supposed to represent like everyday people who fail all the time.
Right.
Or at least that's the sentiment, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm fine with it. It was just funny because it just felt like he could literally do nothing right. And like Frodo actually does a few things.
Right. And he learns.
And he learns.
Because Jim doesn't learn at the end. He's just he's still inept. He's still failing.
After the hasn't started. He's just like, oh, I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
What do I do? I hate this. Why didn't you guys help me? A lot of complaining.
Yeah. Well, and too, like when they depict the villains, they have this sequence where they're like, we gotta choose a new emperor, and so they're like, one of them's like, I'll be emperor, and then there's like music, and he's like shuffling around, and it's like, oh, there's just all this like expressionism. There's not a lot of dialogue, and then someone's like, no, I'll be emperor. It's like, and then they have to like fight. And so it's just kind of like, what I'm trying to say is it's a fairly like simplistic way that the characters navigate and solve this situation.
Well, he's relying on his medium. I mean, he's created all these creatures to be so expressive, so he's just going to tell the story that way.
Exactly.
But especially because he can't tell it in the language he wanted to originally. So he's just like, whatever, I'll just do the one I know.
Right. And then, but then you get one of the characters, he loses this fight. And he gets like outcast or whatever. They're like, shame him and they rip his clothes off and stuff and they cast him out. Also kind of a traumatizing scene.
It is.
Because it's just like evil people doing evil things to other evil people. And it was like, oh, this is a little much. But anyways, that character has this very, very obnoxious thing that he does where he goes,
yeah. But he does it like the whole movie.
It's constantly.
I will say I am not a fan of that creative decision. It was over the top.
It was definitely too much. But you have those two elements, and so like these things, what I'm saying is they temper your expectations for what you expect from these villains.
Right.
So when they go to soul sucking, it's kind of like, whoa. You're just like, holy crap. I wasn't prepared for this. Guacamole. This is on a whole nother level.
Still so great. I love initial reactions whenever I show that to someone. There's because it's also like it's a puppet, right?
Right.
But he puts this like realism to it for one.
Right.
For
He
two,
does
he
this
makes
close up on his face,
right.
and then he has the face like cave
It's
in,
like
and the
caving in.
eyes, and then the breathing.
Yeah, the amount, the breath. It's so visceral because he's just like, I'm gonna put all of my effort into making sure that you understand what just happened to this guy.
Yeah.
Because then at the end, you expect, oh well, he fixes the crystal, whatever, and all this resolution happens. You think, okay, maybe these podling people get their life essence returned to them, right?
No.
Nope. They're just
It's
gonna
gone.
remain in their Renfield state there.
It's terrifying.
So,
I mean, this scene got such a visceral, like, human reaction out of me, and I assume so many other people as well.
It's a very memorable scene, yeah.
And I think that really says something about the power in the movie for it to
Right.
construct everything. Like, I think you maybe, it's sort of like if you weren't invested until that point, you're going to be after that point. Because it's going to be hard, I think, to just be passively watching this movie like, whatever, and then to just not
When is
react
that
to
gonna
that.
happen to another guy? Like,
Right.
Did you see what they did to that thing?
And you're like, stakes have been raised.
Yeah, because it goes so shocking. And I
Yeah.
think it's a delicate balance. That's tough to know.
Yeah.
Okay, when's maybe too much?
Yeah.
When should I not push it that far? Because they do have some of that stuff. Like his name was the Chamberlain. He loses the fight, and they like strip.
Yeah.
It's essentially a visual representation of stripping him of his titles and then outcasting him, which is funny because there's only like 9 of them. And the emperor dies, and then they're like, "You're out too because you lost the fight."
Yeah.
Now there's like 7 of us, and it's well, you probably. I mean, at what cost?
Well, but I mean, that was a good comment about how these bureaucratic overlords are just as petty as can be.
Right.
Right. It's like
it's
all
survival,
they care
yeah.
about is themselves.
Right.
They don't even care about their group. It's just like, if they all died and I was the only one left, that would be great.
At
because
least
then
I'm
I
emperor
would
now.
Be emperor. Yeah, because then I'd be emperor now. So yeah, they're selfish, they're evil, and they're vile, and he just like
It really nails that home throughout the
But I
whole
mean,
movie.
it's like a fable story. So
Yeah.
it's like they're the evil ones, and so there's a nice simplicity to that. That's
Which I appreciate
for
from those days. I think that's one of the things I really liked about him is that it's very straightforward. You know what you're getting, even though it's very weird and wacky and it's very imaginative in a Jim Henson way. It's very clear what you're getting from it.
I would also say this one is a little bit more timeless, which is actually a good segue to talk about Labyrinth, because Labyrinth is very much a product of its time, and I think that with that comes like some advantages and perhaps some disadvantages at the same time.
Yeah, well, let's jump into Labyrinth. So, I mean, Dark Crystal, great film. It is very timeless. It's very charming.
Yeah.
It's got a niche market for sure. It's very, you got to know what you want from it. Like you have to want something like that in order to enjoy it completely, or you have to appreciate the artistry of it. Like you do, kind of a pulled back. Like I appreciate even the storytelling of it. It is simple as it is, and as annoying as Jin is and stuff. Like all of that stuff really draws me in. And I appreciate that even though maybe you're not as drawn to some of that stuff, like you appreciate the work and the effort that went into just creating it. It's like, well, can't help but appreciate that because despite whether you appreciate what he's created or not, you appreciate the fact that he was able to create it at all.
I think the world is better
beauty in
off
that.
with it being here.
Right.
I mean, I think the reason why it doesn't like hit quite so much on a personal level is just like the fundamentals of the story are just kind of, they're just not super strong for me.
No, they're not.
And I guess that it's hard to see past that for myself.
Sure.
Because I guess it feels like, there's so much work put into all these puppets and these sets and all of this stuff I'm just like, well, how come the script is kind of weak at the end of the day?
Yeah, that's
Like,
fair.
it just feels like there's a few elements that would have made, and like, not even that much more, but just like some clarifying details would have been good. A
Mm.
little bit more of a character transformation for Jin, maybe make him less suck a little less.
Make
Um,
him less stupid, please.
yeah, and
Save
then
Jin.
yeah, hashtag save Jin, make Jin better. Um, but they also could have done, like when you're looking at fables, usually there's like a kind of core message or like a kind of symbolic twist or some kind of like meaningful takeaway.
Mm.
And I just don't feel like that was really there or even pushed that much. And I kind of just feel like it's a bit of a missed opportunity with the format that he had. I mean, he's got this world and it's there, but you don't really like get to know the lore that much. It's just kind of like it's there and then we move on to like a new thing. So it's not like properly utilized, and then it doesn't like capitalize on a nice like ending that really, you know, explores all of that fully. And instead, what you get is a movie that's just more about, like I said, being in someone's imagination for a while. So it's almost like a dream where
Oh, that's a good
it,
way to
it
put it.
kind of like it does make sense together, but just like barely, just by a thread. And the rest of it is just like, wow, this was a weird sensory experience, you know?
Fair. Yeah, it's like like you had a fever dream or something.
And I love dreams. I adore dreams. So
Right.
it gets points for that, but also like it's just not a story that like resonates as much.
Yeah, that's fair.
So,
Uh,
but you could maybe elaborate to that, like, because I feel like that's maybe different in your case.
yeah, I mean, the style of it, I think, is what appeals to me most, just because I love this very fantastical fantasy. Because you have stuff
Yeah.
like Lord of the Rings or whatever, but it has a very specific style, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's very elegant and beautiful, but also has kind of the delving into the darkness with like the orcs and things.
Yeah.
And then you have this where it's just everything's kind of weird and wacky. There's nothing that seems normal. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because and that's the reason he didn't have any humans star in this at all. The two main characters are gelflings, which are puppets. And some of the like faraway shots, or whatever, I think kids or something that are done up to
In the
look like him, so
costume,
that
and
they can
yeah.
run around a little easier. But aside from that, you don't see any human faces on this, and I think there's a lot to be said about that as to how charming it is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it appealed to me, was because it was just kind of so immersive into this fantasy
It
realm.
is. Yeah.
And like it's a similar point to yours for sure, but I think it's less of a fever dream and more of like this is a pure fantasy, right? This is like
Okay.
complete immersion into this world. And yeah, you don't get to a lot of expansion on some of the concepts, but it also has a wide variety of things that you get to play around with, like
Okay.
this mystics and the Skeksis and kind of the I don't know, the artistry they like draw their own symbols, and then everything is very specifically designed. Like the Skeksis castle is very angular and distorted and warped, whereas everything to do with the Mystics is very flowy and elegant and artistic. Um, but they're not like, when you look at something like the elves or whatever, and everything is like this is like humanity perfected, right? It's kind of his view on it, and it's
Yeah.
like they're
Yeah.
perfect in all the ways that they do things. Whereas these don't have any kind of resemblance to anything realistic at all. It's just
Yeah.
they kind of have their own styles within the world. And then you have it's a very rich world as well. And I get your point that you don't get to explore too much of it. But
Is the appeal partly to the potential of the world of like what Dark Crystal could be, and every time you could watch it, you get to experience a little bit of what it could have been, and that kind of keeps you interested in.
No, I think that would
No.
be more a point
Okay.
along your lines. I think
Okay.
along my line. I mean, I'm assuming that entirely. So,
No, I think
uh,
that would be accurate. Yeah.
okay. For me, I think it's the fact that it kind of leaves it up to your imagination, which is what I loved about it.
Okay.
Because he shows you the part that he enjoys about this world that he's created, but then he leaves the rest up to you. And so it's
Okay.
almost like he
Okay.
pulls you into his imagination and lets you run wild. And
Okay.
so he leaves enough there for you kind of build whatever you want
Yeah.
within, these
That makes
foundations
sense.
of how this is built. So, it's a bit abstract, I suppose, but that's the point. I mean, that's what I
Yeah.
liked about this piece and Labyrinth, is they're very abstract, even though they have similar themes that are recognizable. Because like Jin essentially goes on like a hero's journey, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
It has a resemblance there, but it also is not quite overly traditional. And then it has prophecies and such, but then it has weird ways of like going about these prophecies. And yeah, I don't know. It just, there's a lot there that's just fun.
Yeah.
It's just a great, like, you're gonna get something new every time you watch it is another thing. You get to experience it with other people, which I thought was really great. Like, I love showing it to people because it's just,
Yeah.
it's such a weird and wacky experience. You never know
Yeah.
what each person's gonna get from it too.
Yeah.
Everyone's gonna
yeah.
get something different, right? You appreciate it on those levels. I appreciate it on these levels. Someone else is gonna be like, I don't know what I'm watching.
That's a testament to its like achievement as a film and as a piece of art.
Sure.
Though, I would say it.
Yeah,
I think that's-
exactly.
so even though like the respect level is absolutely there, even if it's like always going to be slightly a frustrating experience to watch because I know I'm not going to get like a lot of the things that I want answered. But I mean, again, it's like it just illuminates that I am invested and I am interested in this world
Right.
and these characters.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, mine's probably not as quantifiable as yours, but I don't know. It's a
But
lot
that's
more.
the beauty of it.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's the beauty of the project.
I
is
just
I don't
find-
think he wants me to quantify it.
Yeah, that's
I
fair.
think he would have put that there if he wanted that, and I think he was like, no.
Yeah,
you
I
know.
think the if I were to quantify it in like a single word, it's just imaginative, and it's just
I would second that.
it's
yeah.
nice to see how imaginative it comes across, right? Because
Mhm.
obviously he is imaginative, but
Yeah.
the fact that he's able to put that into a visual form is an accomplishment.
Yeah.
And it's so fun to like it's like a theme park ride of a film, in a genre, I guess.
Mhm.
Not like the Star Wars one where you're just gonna jump all around the place, but like something where you get to jump in for a moment and just
One
kind
of
of
those ambient rides where you just
Yeah.
kind of ride like Pirates of the Caribbean, you just sort of observe and you
Right.
get to rock in the boat.
you just get to
with
see this
everyone.
portion of the world for a minute.
Yeah.
It's just cool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then let's talk about Labyrinth and its differences then.
Okay.
Well, what did you? Because you like this movie a little bit less, correct?
Yeah, I have a harder
on
time
average.
with this one.
Okay, so what do you like less about it?
Well, this one has David Bowie in it.
There's that.
And David Bowie, I think I don't like David Bowie as an actor. I don't think I like his music very much either because I don't like the songs very much in this movie. Yeah, so here's my but I'm not sure if I actually like not liking him. There might be something to that as well, like because I need to find something I don't like because there
So
isn't
you're just pulling the contrarian view here.
well, like there is something frustrating I feel frustration when I watch that movie and I'm trying to figure out where it is and I'm not sure where to place it and at the moment at least for this discussion I'm going to say David Bowie, this is your fault.
All right.
It's your music is really just very much locked into a period of time and I think he's got a weird ass costume. Sorry, I'm gonna have you swear on this episode.
Not any more than that, please. I'm trying to keep this family friendly. It is a weird costume, though. It is a little,
Thank you.
little too revealing, guys. Like we get it. His pants are so tight. It's just.
It's like there's nothing left of the imagination when it comes to David Bowie.
Woo.
And then his whole performance is like almost like he's like, oh, I'm like the Goblin King, so I'm gonna be kind of weird. But he does so little with that that it's hard to take seriously. It's contrast with somebody like Christopher Lloyd, who Doc Brown from Back to the Future.
Yeah,
he's the bad guy in Dennis the Menace. Like Christopher Lloyd can like really express himself, or like Tim Curry and Jim Carrey. These are actors who will just be like, "Whoa, I'm going wild and crazy." And you're just gonna have to get on board with it. And funnily enough, with the exception of Lloyd, because I actually do like Christopher Lloyd a lot, but a lot of those other actors, I'm like, I don't really like. It's like too much. But I kind of feel like for this movie, it's like, dude, holding back, restraint. This is not the approach you should take with this kind of a role.
Well, it's Jim Henson. Yeah, it should be wild and wacky, right?
Yeah, I kind of feel like it. I don't know. It's like it's this. All I see is David Bowie. All I see is this pop singer that you put into this movie. He doesn't like pull me into the world. So like that. This is a big like. So that's one reason. The other reason is it's like it's kind of just. I don't know, like the fact like I actually don't need Jennifer Connelly in the movie. I don't need the real people. It just doesn't matter to me. Like I really liked Dark Crystal, how it was just like a pure vision, or as close as we were gonna get to one. So yeah, I think there's like a bit of resistance there, which is funny because I watched Labyrinth first.
Right.
I thought it was okay. There's like moments that I do like in it, but it wasn't this like, masterpiece. Where have you been all my life?
Okay. Yeah, I think I think he was trying to tell, well, I don't know. I don't know enough about why. So I'm not going to assume too much here. My basic guess, without going too far, is that Dark Crystal probably wasn't received super well in its time. It became a cult classic later.
Yeah.
Something we've talked about before, given enough time to age and people will appreciate. So I think because I do know that he was really discouraged by the reception of the film for Dark Crystal specifically, because this was his passion project, right? This is something he really wanted to do.
Yeah.
Where he wasn't constrained to something like the Muppets. Labyrinth felt like his response to that feeling, because it's a very much more traditional fairy tale-esque. It's like a modern day fairy tale, but it has a lot of those elements of like the person and then dealing with consequences and maybe doing something that they shouldn't have without thinking about what those consequences might be. Because you have Jennifer Connelly's character Sarah, who's babysitting, and she's like a 16-year-old or something, but she's babysitting her baby brother. And I think what's implied there is that it's her dad and stepmom, and they both had the kid, and so the kid is like disconnected from her on some level, and then she's having trouble with her stepmother, and so when she's forced to babysit, she's obviously acting out like a teenage girl would. I mean, I hated being consigned to a lot of that responsibility at that age too, and so she's like over dramatizing how terrible this is.
Yeah.
And then ends up wishing that the Goblin King would take away her little brother. And so the point of the thing is, like, she's always got her head in the clouds. She's like reciting this book, The Labyrinth, at the beginning of the movie. Her dog's name is Merlin, and she doesn't live in
Arthur or no, was it Lancelot?
Yeah, Lancelot was the bear. So the implication is that she lives with her head in the clouds, and reality bothers her, and so she tries to get rid of the most annoying part of reality. That she has to go into the clouds to pull him back, and in doing so, she pulls herself back onto the ground. Right? She realizes what responsibility means and consequences and such. So, like, all of these essential themes come to play, and they're very traditional for fairy tales. Right? Fairy tales are ways of teaching lessons in a way that's engaging with children, and whether those be good lessons or bad lessons, or lessons about responsibility, or lessons about caution, right? A lot of that comes from very harsh environments of like, I think Hansel and Gretel is about the time in which basically people were killing their kids because of disease and starvation. And so they were like,
oh, really?
Yeah, they were, and there was ways of like embodying those motifs. And so
a lot of fairy tales are stemming from
the representative of their time and what was going on in them. And so when you're looking at this one, he plays a lot more traditionally, but also he leaves a lot of room for him to just kind of do it as he wants to. Like I was mentioning at the end of the film, Sarah is saying goodbye to these friends that she's made in this fantasy world. But then they're saying, if you need us, just call us. And she says, well, I'll always need you. And so she turns around and they're all in her room and they like go into a dance party or whatever. And so it's almost like a Wizard of Oz type of ending, which I know you haven't seen yet, but
sorry.
She flies off, and
it's on
then
my to-do list.
It's exactly. It's on.
Well, okay, so like some of this way he conveys things, I think they're just an odd way of doing it.
Sure.
Like when she's reciting the verse, it's like the verse itself is like super straightforward. It's not like this, I don't know, like
it's not like a rhyme that's complicated or something.
Yeah, it's not this like it's just like, Goblin King, please take away this baby. Thank you. It's basically like that. It's like literally that simplistic.
I wish that you would take him away right now, I think is the line.
Right now. If you miss the right now, not gonna work.
And
It's like, what?
I think that's his way of saying that, he's just removing your expectations and saying, no, this is my fairy tale. I'll write it how I want. And,
Could be.
but at least it comes across as more pure. Because, I mean, yeah, because she
Yeah.
says like a generic, like rhyming line in the beginning, and the
Right.
goblins are like laughing at her. They're like, that's not it.
Yeah, 'cause
you got to say it the right way.
Yeah, because she's like in her in the bedroom with the baby and like saying this, and then it like cuts to a shot of these goblins, and they're all just clustered around. You don't even know where they are, but they're clearly watching her somehow from
Right.
somewhere, and so it's almost like meta or something. But I mean, I guess it leans into that fairy tale even more. But like that's another weird decision on top of it. The movie
fair.
just marches to its own drumbeat and is kind of like, meh, I'll do it this way because I feel like it.
Yeah, it feels less pure than the Dark Crystal because it seems like he's being dictated or he's trying to cater to something rather than just creating what's in his head. And I get that. I understand like where you come to that conclusion is to like, yeah, it's a little more, it's less creative to do it that way where it's like this generic line that anyone would say. Because then it's funny because it's like, well, what if someone accidentally said that or said it jokingly and he just shows up and takes the baby?
Well, I think that is consistent with what I was saying before, or one of us was saying before about how you've got the Emperor scene that's in Dark Crystal that's funny, but also moving the plot forward. I mean, this is the same basic thing, so it's not really fair to hold that against him. I guess it's just like the believability of the world. Like I don't like because he has to do a transition from like the real world to this fairy tale world now that he has them both in the movie, and the transition is just like all of a sudden out of nowhere, here's some like puppet goblins out of nowhere, and you're like, ah, like if you sat down and watched this movie having no context of what it was, you'd be like, whoa, what am I getting? What am I watching here? Right? So
well, I kind of like how it does that because
Yeah.
she's living in her imagination for the first 10 minutes of the film.
Yeah.
And then she's upset at this kid, and then she starts talking about how she wishes these goblins would take him away, and then all of a sudden they're real. And so it's almost like you get dropped into her head.
Okay.
It's almost like
that
she's
makes sense.
forming reality now because of, her frustration.
Mm-hmm.
And there, like you said, so it's this weird shot where it's just, there's like, I don't even know, like 12 goblins. And it's just them. It's just framed, and it's like a dark background. And they're like watching, and they're trying to tell her what to say. They're like, "Well, it's not that hard. You should just say this line."
Yeah.
and it's funny because at first you don't see where they're at, and then she walks out of the room. The kid stops crying, and she goes back in, and he's gone.
Yeah. Instantly stops
And
crying.
so you pick up that like, oh no. And so then she instantly tries to go back on the decision. That's when David Bowie's character shows up and presents this option of like, well, you can go into your room and play with your toys and be free of this heartache, this child, or you can go through my labyrinth and find him and bring him back, and you have 13 hours to do so. But then the transition there is it switches back where it like looks at him, and then it switches back, and then it switches, and then they're in a different landscape, and now they're. And I really liked that too.
I liked that one. That transition worked for me.
Yeah,
of like him sort of almost taking her by the hand and pulling her into this world,
right?
As she accepts to do it,
and he gives her a choice there too, where it's like you can go back, or you can be stuck here for this amount of time, and the consequence is if she doesn't get Toby, he turns into a goblin. So it also makes you wonder. Are all these goblins previous babies, or like what's the implication here? So another dark idea of Jim Henson that's kind of disturbing.
Yeah.
But then the rest of the film is her going through the labyrinth and
all the supernatural, like surreal experiences she encounters along the way.
Right.
There's a big.
It's very Fever Dream-esque too.
Yes, it is. This one does remind me a lot more of Alice in Wonderland, especially like the part where she's talking with the two jesters. And they're like, oh, she's like asking for directions. And then one of them's like, well, one of us always chose the truth. The other always tells a lie. So which is it? And so, and then she goes up and she's like, she asked one of them a question. And then he's like, let me think about that. He's got to like think about it.
Then he's got to go to his conference and talk to like the other head down below.
Yeah, because he's like, it's like two heads on the side of a shield. And so he's like, and then he's like, what do you think? And then, they got to like, so it just feels very much like Alice in Wonderland where she meets these encounters. And Jennifer Connelly is very much like Alice from really like the book and the films where she's the sensible one, she's the logical one, and then everybody around her is just talking nonsense. And sometimes she partakes in it a little bit, and then other times she's like, okay, that's too far. I can't follow this. Makes no sense.
Sure.
I don't think the writing is quite as like rhythmically clever as Lewis, but I feel like that's a really high bar. So
Yeah,
I feel like
that's
that's not
difficult.
reasonable or really even necessary. I mean, it has Alice in Wonderland vibes, and that's plenty.
Yeah, you can tell what the inspiration is without it being necessarily plagiaristic.
Yeah, because the Labyrinth is a different landscape than Alice in Wonderland, and Labyrinth does ultimately make more sense. There's like fun moments that do shine, and I think they're in some ways easier to grasp than Alice in Wonderland. Like I love the little worm on the wall.
I was just gonna ask you to. So, what is it that you liked about that one? Why did that stick out to you as so memorable?
I don't know. That's a good question, but she's just lost. She's frustrated, and then she just hears a voice, "Hello," and then she's like, "Oh." Like, what'd you say? She's like, did you say hello? And he's like, no, I said hello. And then he gives her directions. And he's like, explains to her how like the wall is like an illusion. You can actually walk right through it. And then she steps in. She's like, oh, I get it. So it's sort of like that part in Indiana Jones, The
Right.
Last Crusade, where it like pulls the camera and you can see, oh, there is a walkway. You just can't see it when you're looking at a particular angle. And then she starts to go one way. It's like, no, no, don't go that way. Go the other way. And then she goes, oh, thank you so much. But she never told him where she wanted to go. She just was trying to get out of the labyrinth. And so he comments after she leaves, whew, like she almost went towards the castle, but that's
Right.
where she needs to go. So he definitely.
So she doesn't ask. They don't contextualize any of this. She goes, "All right, I'll just not go where he told me not to go."
It's like such an honest mistake, but it's now going to be like a huge headache for her. And he thinks he's helping her out.
So again, why that scene? Just because it had so much charm to it? Like
Yeah,
it
I
just
mean, I
felt
think
more
the scene
naturalistic?
like works in isolation.
Okay.
And I guess like it's because I guess like more my problem is like the songs. Like, see, again, I just want to pin it on David Bowie because like right now I feel like I don't like his
He
David
was
Bowie
the music
songs.
director for those. Like him, and I think
Yeah,
Trevor Jones helps him a little bit, but it's mostly him.
yeah, and I also just it's like I feel like you have to be in a David Bowie mood in order to appreciate the movie. So it feels like half Jim Henson, half David Bowie. And I guess like I just don't like that blend or something. And so that's a moment
Okay.
where it's just kind of like the nice little humorous dialogue takes over and there's like a twist to like how the environment works. You get to learn a little bit more about the world. It's similar to when she falls down this pit and there's all these like hands like grabbing her, which is like it's pretty creepy. But then the hands like form different faces and there's like 10,000 different ways he uses like a multitudes of hands to make a face. And it's just great to see because you're like, whoa, this is just a creepy sequence. Really adds a lot of flavor. So like that's another really good one.
Yeah, I saw. I'm not exactly sure who the guy was, but I was looking it up today. Just different, behind the scenes type stuff. He was talking about how he had mentioned. He's like, wouldn't it be interesting if? Because I think they were just throwing around a bunch of wacky ideas, and most of those people apparently would go up to Jim, and he was very approachable apparently with a lot of this stuff. And they would just throw out that idea, and then he would develop it in his own way. And so the guy was talking
Okay.
about how he's like, "What isn't it fun when you do like shadow puppets on the wall, and you're just kind of making this?
Uh-huh.
What if we had a scene like that where she's conversing in that way?" And he's like, "That's interesting. What if?" And then he like expounded it into this idea.
Okay.
So you have this entire, and I think that whole set was practical set because
Yeah.
I looked at that too, and it's like a 40-foot tall wall,
Wow.
and it has all these hands just kind of built into the wall, and she's on a harness just kind of falling down into it. So people are
Yeah.
like grabbing her and stuff, and then there's like fake hands that are just kind of flopping around or whatever.
Yeah.
But then they had these artists who are already puppeteers, so they're very aware of how to use their hands.
Mm-hmm.
Then they kind of go in. They had these like latex things created to make these hands look all green and grotesque and like
Uh-huh.
decaying almost.
Yeah.
And then they would form into different faces, and one would form a nose, and then two or three would form a mouth, and then two would
Yeah.
form the eyes, that kind of thing. And they did multiple different versions of it in order to, and then they have like these weird distorted voices and stuff. So it's like very disturbing on a visual level is something that'll stick with you for sure
Yeah.
because it's just creepy inherently.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something that like is very classical to his style,
Yeah.
very classical to the types of story he tells and how he views how some of that visual medium comes through. Right, that's like it's like communicating something very clearly in
Yeah.
a weird and wacky way.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean it's a modern day fairy tale. A lot of the cliche fairy tale marks, but also a lot of Jim Henson charm. Maybe the mixture is what you don't like too much. Maybe it's like it's not as pure Jim Henson imagination and more like
Yeah, I mean the commitment in Dark Crystal is definitely very appealing because
sure,
it's at some point I have to relent because I realize, this clearly has a vision that's beyond the scope of what I can conceive. But Labyrinth doesn't feel that way. It feels like I can conceive the scope. I've seen fairy
right,
tales. I mean,
fair.
to its credit, it does do it well. It's just, stylistic choices. But like tell me more about what you like about it so much because you don't seem to have this disparity like I do between the two. I assume you appreciate both of them equally. Is that right, or do you have a favorite?
That's actually a good question. To me, they're different enough to like them for separate reasons, so they don't
Okay.
quite compare for me.
Okay.
Similar reasons with Dark Crystal because it's such a pure representation of his imagination. That like I like it for that reason, whereas Labyrinth is a lot more accessible. And both of these movies have a lot of scenes that I don't particularly like
Yeah.
necessarily. Um, they get a little too goofy. Like for instance, there's that scene in Labyrinth where these red things come out and they do this weird dance and song number and they're like throwing their heads around and stuff.
Oh
It is
yeah,
just it's
yeah.
so out of place and so wacky and has nothing to do
We're
with
doing
anything.
this now.
Yeah. And they're like, "Why don't you take your head off and throw it around?" And it's like, what is this doing for anybody? It didn't make a whole lot of sense. And it was just for him to have another moment and another like set of creatures that just show up in this labyrinth.
Yeah.
And I think that one he went too far on, right? It's kind of like the Tom Bombadil thing where it's like,
Ugh.
how does this character I mean, I understand his like
Yeah.
significance to the world, but how does this help with the narrative as it is right now?
He
Like
doesn't. He makes
if
it
you
worse.
insert him right there, what does he do? And so
Right.
that was the same thing that I have with those creatures. So it has moments like that, probably two or three in each film,
Yeah.
but at the same time, like you were saying, one of the artists that I use this argument for because he's not like Jim Henson at all is Tarantino. Because
Okay.
Tarantino also, I think I have the same not critique level of appreciation as you do for Henson.
Okay.
Is that I don't care for most of his movies. Like I'm not a Tarantino fan. I think most of them are just not my style. But
Sure.
I concede that what you get feels like something he created from start to finish, right? Like
Yes, it
most of them are
does.
very much his style all the way through, and he gets to communicate that.
Yeah.
And so what you're getting is what he wants you to get,
Right.
whether you like it or not. Like that's his vision that came through,
He's not a hack
right?
who's just gonna follow what everybody's telling him what to do, or he's trying to meet some kind of quota. No, it's his vision.
Yep.
That's what appears at the end result. And yes, I agree with that sentiment for both
Yeah.
of the. I think that's a very fair description for both of them.
Right. And so you feel like it's a very pure representation of what he wanted you to receive.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing for Henson for both of these movies. And so they have a lot of
Yeah.
his charm, a lot of his, fingerprints all over it. Labyrinth, like I said, is quote unquote more accessible just on a general level because you have a human character to whom you can connect. Has some lessons in there that are a little bit more relatable.
Yeah.
I liked Bowie and his music. I definitely think a lot of his dialogue is very clunky. I don't know why exactly they didn't fix that. And maybe it was Bowie's influence, I'm not really sure, but they didn't his interactions with people are very almost too abstract. Like they don't flow
Yeah.
very well. The tension's not quite pushing back and forth properly.
Yeah.
And I think he wanted it to, and so it feels weird cuz like you're like I know what you're trying to do here, but it's not working properly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I understand your critique there, and I agree with it on some level. Because when you're dealing with a character like that, he's a Goblin King. So how would a Goblin King act? Would he know how to interact with humans on this level? because he's offering her a choice, and then by the end of the movie, he's like in love with her and trying to get her to stay, and
Mm-hmm.
also to let him keep the baby, which apparently is going to turn into a goblin if he does. So he's adding to his ranks and then getting a wife or whatever it is that he wants her to be.
Yeah.
But I also really love the music because I love the '80s in general. Like '80s music is just, and that's like quintessential, but it's also mixed with like a fantastic kind of feel.
Yes.
And so in my head, it's like a perfect pairing because it's '80s plus Jim Henson, and it just like has this, it's niche for sure.
Yeah.
But to me, it's like, well, those two things are great, and now I get them mixed. So that's mine.
Well, I think that's part of the Jim Henson experience in general too. It
Yeah,
doesn't feel like I think when he's thinking of the full scope of the story, he thinks about it, but really he just gets so fascinated with the little moments, and that's what excites him. So all the
could
little
be
scenes he just pours his heart into, and then afterwards, yeah, they basically connect. You know,
basically.
yeah,
It, it,
I
it
I
has
think
an ending in here somewhere, and that's what we need to get to, right?
yeah, I feel like that's part of the joy of it. I feel like that's the impression I get from going through his movies is that each
Mm,
sequence needs to be appreciated almost like independently from the others. They do add up to something, but what they add up to, like you said, is going to be really abstract and up to the viewer to decide.
yeah,
He's less interested in pushing that message on you. He's really just happy to kind of like, carry you through the experience. And so in so doing, he's basically making a it's like a space. They're very much like these are great movies to put on in the background or for like a movie night where you gotta it's like sleep overnight or people are making popcorn or you're rolling pizzas in the background as the movie's playing. Like you can start this movie, you don't need everybody sitting down ready to watch it. You can just start it,
yeah,
right? And the atmosphere is just so different because you're gonna jump into scenes and then you're gonna step out on other scenes, and it's just very free flowing that way, which
yeah.
I
That's
think
fair.
is a mark of quality because not a lot of movies do that. But it is a different viewing experience, almost like silent pictures. So that's a very different kind of viewing experience, and you need to have the right mindset for it.
True.
So I would equate his work to something along those lines as well.
Just in the way that they communicate their message, essentially, and how they're
Yeah,
perceived and all that.
yeah, and the way that there's not a lot of pressure on each scene to
I see.
add to the greater whole. The
Yeah,
pressure of the scene is to be a memorable scene in and of itself. And because of that, it makes it a really powerful experience, like on multitudes of levels, but you kind of forget why you're there while you're going through the movie, and then
which
it
works for
ends and you
his
forget.
style, though. I mean, that
Yeah,
that is the point. That's
it
why
does.
it's so Alice in Wonderland esque,
Yeah.
because it has this kind of, I don't know, laissez-faire of way of
Yeah.
like expressing itself. And
Mhm.
it's just like, well, enjoy this one and enjoy this one and enjoy this one. And in a way, it's like meta drawing you in, just as this Jennifer
Yeah.
Connelly's character is going through all this series of events because they're all memorable as well. But she's trying to get to her brother. We're trying to, experience the movie, but at the same time, we're getting lost in it. So I don't know. I think that's a good
Yeah.
point. And it resounds, not resounds. It resonates with
Resonates.
a lot of people
Yeah.
on those levels, and like you said, his vision definitely comes through.
Yeah.
And if nothing else, you can appreciate the fact that like he had a chance to allow his artistry to
Mhm.
be what it was, unfiltered, and I mean, he definitely had to fight with the corporations and such, but
Yeah.
what comes through is more or less pure. At least that's how it feels.
It does. And I think this is also a measure of like range of art appreciation that you have because you're a huge Star Wars fan. And Star Wars, we're talking original trilogy, like the good stuff. Original Star Wars is very much like on point. Everything has to be contributing to the overall story.
Right.
If it's not, get out. And that's partly why those movies are so good. But I mean, it's like they're really tight scripts
Yeah.
at the end of the day. It's just like everything is exactly what you need to drive the story forward. And I love that forward momentum about them.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
and
it's the same thing for the Spider-Man film, the first one at least.
yeah.
Everything's very tight. Like there's nothing in there that doesn't need to
Hmm.
be there, and so it just says. Whereas his is a lot more meandering with Jim
Yeah, it's
Henson.
very just like ooh, whimsical and all over the
Right.
place. But that, like I said, totally different range of appreciation that comes in there. I feel like I would, you know, acclimate more if I just like watched more of it. But then again, I guess it, it kind of depends because I watched a bunch of silent films and I wasn't like super won over by most of them. But that was mostly because they wanted to not be silent films, but they just had to be. And so
Right.
it didn't feel like someone's passion. It felt like someone really
They
wanted
weren't
it to be
limited
a
by
lot
choice.
more.
They weren't. Yeah, it's not an
Yeah.
artistic decision that these aren't making any noise.
Yeah. So it was just kind of fascinating. I
Huh.
mentioned in a previous episode that I was watching the um, Oscar nominees from the very first Oscars.
Oh,
And
right.
so they're all, silent pictures. And just for so many of them, basically all of them except for one, was just a little weighed down by the fact that they had so much writing in there for all this context. And I'm like, man, you really need to.
Idiots.
You need to do this with visuals, guys. You've got a visual medium. You don't have audio, so you're
Right.
gonna have to just
Play to your
accept
weaknesses.
that. Yeah,
Use what you got.
and it's funny because the film that does the best at this, Sunrise, was made by a German film director, and the Germans, of course, at that time, German Expressionism, they had done like Nosferatu and The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and these are films that are all about like making the sets like dreamlike, and it's like you're part of your imagination, not realistic at all, right? And then very little dialogue, mostly just visuals that you see, and you tell the story through that, and a lot of like dark shadows and using light to convey things and color. Not, I mean, it is black and white, but you put like filters and things,
Right.
like after the fact. So, these are all the stuff that they would work with. And then it's like you go over to America and we're just like, they're not talking
I wish
yet.
there was sound. I want to hear them. Yeah, they're not playing to what their limitations
They clearly
are.
have. Yeah. There was just I mean, I'm sure there's some other great silent pictures that I just have not seen, but it was just interesting to take a snapshot of that and be like, man, you guys could have really done more of this. And the power, getting back to Jim Henson, is that because he's like almost like the lone voice on this particular genre, it's sort of like you're stuck just appreciating it for what it is. But even in that, I think there is a test. I think he has the right idea. I think if you wanted to do like puppet style movies, Henson makes a really valid point that puppets are so interesting, and the more interesting puppets you can put in your movie, the better. I don't know if it would be worth it to just do a regular movie, but there's like a puppet character in it throughout the whole thing. Like, does that really like matter or help anything? I mean, I guess you could argue there's Yoda, but Yoda is there to like add flavor and variety to the Dagobah sequence,
Right.
and to kind of change up
He
your
plays off
expectations.
of Luke. He doesn't. Yeah.
Yes,
hold it
exactly.
necessarily his own.
But like, if you wanted to be like, oh, we have a puppet for no other reason, it's kind of like,
why?
You're gonna feel that weird sentiment. But like here, the reason is that like there's hundreds, like literally hundreds of puppets in these movies.
Yeah.
There's so many of them, and they're all different and just so imaginative that it's like that is the point of the movie. You should be looking forward to the next cool puppet interaction that you're gonna get.
Yeah, that's fair. And it's like you said, you're not constrained to what limitations a human has. Because you can make it however you want it. You can make them look however you want it. You can make them move however you want. I mean, you're not constrained by anything. So he almost created his own limitations and then worked within those.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it comes through so charmingly.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I'll always love these movies. I think there's plenty to be there to be appreciated regardless of your problems with it. And I think that's what I appreciate about, having us watch it together.
Yeah.
Where I not grew up necessarily, but I definitely, it had everything in it.
Them and then
yeah, well, it had everything that I liked when I was growing up. And so it just became part of my childhood, even though it wasn't necessarily part of my childhood. It embodied nostalgia so well for me. And so it just kind of was like, well, this guy is imaginative on a level that I would like to be, or would imagine myself to be. And so it's really fun to see these two pieces specifically because they're more along the lines of like how I would act, Brian, his situation, or how I would represent things visually. And so it's fun for those reasons. And then it's fun just to see, like I said, with, some of these earlier projects, they really embody a different mindset, right? It's not, they don't feel so corporatized. They feel like it's a bunch of artists, a bunch of nerdy dudes that are on set, just like, how can we make this as fun as possible?
Yeah.
and really
Yeah.
enjoy the process, and then have people enjoy what we're doing. And so it just feels fun all around. And it
Yeah.
really
The
bleeds through on
atmosphere
both
is,
these.
yeah,
It's just that's what I really
wonderful.
love about them. That's why they're
Mhm.
so charming and so nostalgic. Is same thing with stuff like Princess Bride.
Mhm.
Everybody looks like they're enjoying themselves,
Yeah.
either on
Yeah.
set or music or directing or whatever, and it just bleeds through. Like that's why
Yeah.
everybody loves those movies. Back to the Future, Star Wars, like they're
Yeah.
things where people are allowed to breathe, and it wasn't just the original visionary and his vision coming through. It's I'm providing a space where all of us can enjoy this in a way that's very artistic. And so Jim Henson really like embodies that because he's so
Yeah.
much more imaginative than a lot of these other guys. Like he's
Mhm.
just so like his scope is a little bit wider, or it's just he's in a different universe, but he's
Mhm.
still able to communicate
Yeah.
on that level. So yeah, that's why I like Jim Henson and these two specifically, because everybody else knows Muppets and
Yeah.
Sesame Street and all that kind of stuff, but these two are a little bit more niche, even though they're more well received these days. They're a lot more, I think, pure to what Jim Henson was wanting to do more often in his career and didn't
Yeah.
get to, unfortunately.
Yeah, no shade on, the Muppets and stuff. Like
Right.
I love the Muppets, but they are part of like this larger, I guess, entity, and they sort of locked into like the corporate world on some
Sure.
level, right? And there is something really, these other movies are like, they might be difficult to get into, but at the same time they're also like, um what's the word, like almost contradictory,
Oh, okay. Yeah. Hmm.
a breath of fresh air, because you get into them and it's like, wow, this is just like your imagination on steroids,
Yeah.
and there's no
And I
y-
get to see it. Yeah.
yeah, and I get to see it and I get to enjoy it and kind of take part in that. And it's like it's a huge win for like free expression and art
Mm.
as form of expression,
Yeah.
right?
Definitely.
So yeah, there's like a true beauty in that.
Yeah. I think that's a good point to end on.
It's funny that these two movies we put in the Halloween segment because of the darker elements in them, which are definitely there,
Yeah.
but like his spirit still rises to the top as like something so pure and heartwarming.
Right.
So I don't know, I just
Maybe I'll save this for later. No, I'm kidding. This will be an October episode for sure.
yeah.
Especially because of that scene we watched earlier, right? That's
Yeah.
if nothing else, remember it for that. Well, thank you for joining us. I hope that you've enjoyed this episode, and we will see you next time.